There David stood, the safety and comfort of home far behind him. The cold, unyielding black of the forest before him. The voice beckoned closer still until he was face to face with an enormous, ancient-looking oak tree. David scanned the tree, its long and ancient features lightly blanketed by white, fluffy snow. The voice began to fade until David was standing all alone in the dark, silent night, face to trunk with the oak. David heard what sounded like glass rolling across the ground right next to the base of the tree. He looked down, and there, as if appearing from nothing, a small, glowing vial sat in the snow. Upon examining, David found a small tag on the side that, as before, read, "Drink me." The liquid pulsated inside the bottle, swirling a neon rainbow of colors around inside. It almost looked alive. David considered the liquid before the voice had returned. Whispered voices. Yes, it was as if David was hearing multiple voices at once. The voices continued to goad David on until finally, David opened the top and gulped the fluid down. He did not spit it out from the taste. In fact, David could put no distinct flavor to it. It was a sweet fruit drink, then seemed to morph into something completely different only seconds after, into a more bitter taste. Finally, it changed into a flavor that at the time David had not yet tasted, but would at the age of 17. Alcohol. And it was strong, too. Strong enough to make David gag. Suddenly, the dark began to circle David. The snow stopped falling, and the black of the wintry night now enveloped the boy even more so than before, allowing him to see nothing but the tree in front of him. David began to hear a small, distant sound. A clock. A grandfather clock, the same as before. And the tree seemed to change now. In front of David's eyes, he watched the large oak open up at the trunk. The bark unraveled itself from the trunk of the tree and revealed a blinding light. When the light had faded enough that David could see the same large, ornate door that he had seen before now faced him. This time, it was already wide open. And, seeing no reason to go this far without going for it, he walked again into Wonderland. Upon entering, David was pulled roughly to one side by a very feeble arm with almost no strength remaining. He looked up to find that the figure was a life-sized playing card. David could take no more, he thought. The sights and sounds of this place had been mad thus far, but this... Was he even in reality anymore? Was this twisted place even remotely normal enough to be able to run off of any sort of logic? Don't speak, for I haven't much time. Listen, boy, you should not be here. You should have stayed in your bed, child. This place is a lie. God, this is no Wonderland. It's... Oh, no. I think I hear somebody coming. I must go, but... Boy! David nodded. Whatever you do not trust them. Do not trust the Hatter. Those eyes! Beware the Hatter's stare. Before David could even begin to try and make sense of everything that he had just been told, the card ran off into the nearby foliage, almost as if he were hiding from something. David noted the peculiar way in which he, quote, ran off, as he sauntered off on his barely functioning limbs, though they looked more like stumps than legs. David oriented himself and began to walk again. Occasionally, as he meandered around, he could have sworn that he could see a small red glinting just out of his line of direct sight. But there was never anything there upon investigation. Eventually, he came upon a giant, gate-like structure made of hedges. The structure extended far out, further than David could make out himself. David entered the foliage, and as he did, he looked on in amazement as the walls of green surrounding him filed out, lining themselves up side by side and connecting together. The greenery opened up a pathway that led straight forward for what must have been miles. At the end of this pathway stood a large Victorian-style castle. It had a peculiar design. It had 3 battlements, all shaped like giant marble hearts. In the center was an enormous stained glass window with a giant clock face designed into the center. When he neared the castle, the large entrance doors opened wide, and there stood what David had expected, but had hoped against seeing. The Hatter. That smile of fake pearls flashing with an air of confidence. Sinister confidence. The devilish figure outstretched his long limbs wide and loudly announced, "Fellow denizens of Wonderland, our king has returned! Praise be to him! David, my dear king, we welcome you to your very own castle, the seat of power through which you shall rule all of Wonderland. Shall I show you around, sire?" It sounded strange coming from the Hatter, as if he did not truly respect the title that he had proclaimed David to be owner of. Almost like the Hatter knew something and did not care if David knew it as well. As previously stated, he was supremely confident.
My kingdom? Huh. My castle? Wait, what do you mean by all of Wonderland?
David asked. The Hatter beamed a nasty-looking smirk, and that little red glint, so faint that none others would have worried about it but David. He knew, though it was difficult, nigh impossible to not question. Beware, beware, the Hatter's stare. David had, at this point, trained his eyes to focus on that faint flashing from those insidious eyes. The Hatter knew he had piqued the boy's interest, or, at the very least, found something of interest to bait him with. He had to be careful, though. As mad as he was, an idiot was one thing he was not. He knew all too well that the boy did not share a shred of trust for him. In fact, he planned on it. This one was special.
Just like the rest of them,
thought the Hatter.
Well, sire, if you will follow me, I will show you to your throne room,
proposed the Hatter. Again, he extended his gloved hand to David. David would not take the Hatter's hand, however. The Hatter grew annoyed at this.
Incessant, disrespectful little bastard! You need to be taught some manners,
he thought, while the boy stood there, refusing his gesture.
Right then, follow me,
said the Hatter. All the while they walked, David would speak no words to the Hatter. At first, it didn't bother the entity, but the child's stubborn resolve was gnawing at the scraps of the Hatter's mind that still held memory of what it was to feel patience.
Patience. A thing wrought with squabbling peons who thought themselves better simply because they could wait where others could not. Patient. 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 Yes. We must be patient. This time, we will not leave. That I will personally see to.
The Hatter led the boy to a large, decorated room. In the center stood a large throne. Just as before, the top of the chair was adorned with a pocket watch ornament made of sparkling gold and silver and glittering diamonds encrusted into the sides.
This
Gestured the Hatter.
is your throne room. This very room is the seat of power for the entirety of Wonderland. I do so hope that it befits your liking.
David took in the room, but one question pushed its way through the dozens of contending others. The Hatter had not stopped talking, though David did not care. Without warning or regard, David cut off the Hatter mid-sentence.
What's with all these clocks?
The Hatter was taken aback by the boy's continual disrespect for his host.
Cocky little prick. Interrupting me in my house! It'll just make it all the more worth it. We just have to be patient. Nobody is unbreakable.
He thought. He reconstituted himself and walked ahead of David to gesture to the shimmering extravagance that sat atop the gold and silver throne.
You mean these, sire?
Yes, those. I noticed there was one on the window outside, and there was another one there, and...
David paused. He struggled to think, but recalled one other watch of the same sort. It was none other than the first thing to bring him back to this bizarre place. The rabbit! The one David had followed, along with that same shimmering watch against the frost-covered glass of his kitchen window. They had led him back here.
And?
Said the Hatter.
There was a rabbit. A white rabbit in a waistcoat and a watch. Like that one. There. I followed him here.
A rabbit in a waistcoat? Don't be crazy. That is simply impossible.
David, although knowing it was meant sarcastically, responded.
If anything is crazy around here, it's certainly not a rabbit.
No. Now, whatever could you mean by that, Davy boy? Are you suggesting that somebody in your kingdom is mad?
As a hatter.
He said sternly. Then, in that very moment, whatever shades had been placed on David's mind to show him these opulent scenes were then removed. Darkness spread over the room, and a dangerously bright red glow emanated strongly from the spot where the Hatter stood. David focused his gaze to see the Hatter's eyes glowing a menacing red. This time, unlike before, the glow did not recede, but rather grew brighter, and David began to become very, very frightened. David had only looked upon those eyes for a mere few moments, however. That was all that it took. Oh, but don't go worrying or feeling bad for Davy boy. He was warned. The Hatter smiled as he slowly made his way to where the boy stood, skipping happily through the throne room to land inches from the boy's face. Laughed the Hatter, a sinister grin spreading ear to ear, forming on his lips. He had David right where he wanted him. Later this month, Chapter 10 of Poisoned Minds and Wicked Lies. Having been hypnotized by the Hatter's sinister magic, even that may not be enough for curious young David. The rabbit awakens David to a new day and attempts to show him more of his palace. But is he really there for that? As he ventures further off into the castle, more and more begins to click in our hero's head. Soon he comes upon two massive doors. But wait, somebody approaches, and they seem pissed. What will become of David and the rabbit? Find out next time in Madness in Wonderland, Chapter 10 of Poisoned Minds and Wicked Lies. I can't wait to see you all again.